Former Defense Secretary Robert Gates' tell-all memoir has rocked the White House this week. Here with his reaction, former advisor to the UK Ministry of Defense, Michael Kay. Now, Michael, thanks for being with us. You are a retired lieutenant colonel and a former advisor to the UK Ministry of Defense.
I am.
And I was reading that you flew an assault helicopter.
Yeah, I did. I've done 10 operational tours of duty. I've done 3 in Baghdad. I crossed the border in 2003, up in between Basra and Fallujah. I've done 3 tours in Afghanistan. I worked with Carl Eikenberry in Kabul. I've done the strategic plan in Helmand Province. So I've been all over the place.
This book that just came out, which is a bombshell, and it comes out actually next week, talks about a president who isn't sure of his own surge strategy, sending people into Afghanistan. How does that make someone who is in the military, when it comes to his own boss or the person sending him in, not even being sure whether they should be there?
Well, I think as a military person, you've got to understand that you are just a tool of foreign policy, and so you're there at the whim of your lords and masters, which in this case are the politicians, and in the US case it's the administration. So I think as a military guy, if you're in country and you're fighting a war that the politicians don't actually believe in, it makes life a lot more difficult for you from a psychological perspective. But that said, I've got some real issues with Afghanistan, because in 2001, I think the US actually achieved the mission 3 to 4 months after 9/11, and that was to destroy the Al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan, and the US did that supremely effectively. Where then we went wrong was this notion of providing a security blanket and a rule of law and rebuilding the country over the political, the economic, and the security lines of development. And that's really difficult.
When we do things like that, Michael, I mean, the United Kingdom is very much a partner of the United States in these things.
Absolutely, 100%.
So, I mean, did you question it then? I mean, the whole idea of going into Afghanistan, which is ruled by these tribal organizations, you know, this one living in a cave and that one living in a cave. I mean, were you uncertain of that yourself? Yeah,
personally, I mean, there were a lot of my guys that questioned it. And the reason for that is you've just got to look back to the insurgency in Vietnam. You've got to look back to the Soviets going into Afghanistan in the 1980s who walked away with their tail between their legs. You've got to look at the way that we didn't achieve our objectives in Iraq. So you've got to look at history. And for me, the key thing that the West needs to get their head around is that the domestic population's will of the occupying force, so for instance in this case the US public or the UK public, their will shatter sooner than any insurgent will, because it's a fight for national survival. If you had insurgents coming across the national borders of America, people in this country would fight for decades and decades to ensure the safety and security, because it's your homeland. Well, flip it on its head. That's exactly what the Taliban are doing in Afghanistan.
All right, let's talk about, you talked about Iraq. Change gears a little bit as it relates to Fallujah. Now, Fallujah, and when was it? 4 Americans are burned and hung from a bridge there. Now we have Al-Qaeda flags flying over Fallujah after all the men and women who were killed and maimed in Iraq. I mean, what was the point?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this isn't a surprise to me, Judge, and the reason it's not a surprise is because Iraq is connected to Syria. Like Afghanistan is connected to Pakistan. What happens is that Al-Qaeda thrive in ungoverned spaces. And the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, a guy called Baghdadi, has actually moved to Aleppo in Syria to regenerate the Al-Qaeda cause in the form of ISIS.
Okay, so he's the guy who's against Assad in Syria. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, they're the guys that are colluding with the FSA, but there's interfrictions there which we won't go into.
The Free Syrian Army.
Exactly, but what's going on in Iraq at the moment in terms of resurgence of Al-Qaeda in Fallujah, it's not a military issue, it's a political issue. And the reason I say that is you've got a divisive Shia Prime Minister in Maliki who actually sentenced his Sunni vice president to death a couple of years ago, who's now in exile in Turkey. This has created sectarian hatred between Shia and Sunni within Iraq. And so you then can't overlay a Western military force
on top of that,
on top of what's broken.
And you know what? I have a feeling, Michael, that going forward, this country is going to learn a lot more about Shia, Sunni, Aleppo, and all that.
I agree.
Alawite, I should say.
Yeah,
anyway.
let's stop putting a Band-Aid over a huge gaping wound. Let's actually look at the problem.
And maybe we ought to look at what we're doing there in the first place. Anyway, Michael Kay, thanks for being with us. Good to see you as well. And coming up, who is the Obama crony picked to lead the IRS investigation? Stay with us.